Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be with you, even though that's under the current circumstances that are facing the Palestinians, both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. I would like to really focus my remarks today specifically on the question of genocide. And why is it very important and critical to focus on the question of genocide at this time? Palestinians have been facing a systematic genocide since the early period of the history. This is not a single event beginning in October, but rather a continuation of a process that has started with the arrival of the British in 1917. I say that the issuing of the Balfour Declaration and even the planning of the British to issue the Balfour Declaration and dispossess the Palestinians begins the Nakba. Even though that sometimes when we speak of the Nakba, we begin with narrating 1948, while it's correct to think of the Nakba in its specific name in 1948, but it begins in earnest with the arrival of the British in 1917. So literally, we are speaking of over 100 years, 100 and almost 6 years separated from the Balfour Declaration and the arrival of the British. The British made it possible to incubate the last settler colonial project, which is Israel, and to dispossess the Palestinians, who were 97% of Palestine's population at that time, with 3% Jewish population that also was predominantly Palestinian Jews, something that people also don't recognize in this. So Palestine was the last settler colonial project to be commissioned by the British and by European powers, and incorporated into this process is the Paris Peace Conference post-World War I, incorporated the Balfour Declaration and gave recognition to the British, allowing or making it possible for the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Then the next step in this process was the League of Nations, and by granting the British a mandate authority, incorporated the Balfour Declaration in it, which was an oxymoronic statement that the League of Nations said that the mandate is to prepare the populations that are under mandate to arrive at a point of self-governance and independence. But the British violated the basic assumptions even in the mandate, and I would say this was also the double speak that the British and European powers have had at the time. So it was incorporated into the mandate, and from that point on, the British took on the task of dispossessing and transferring Palestine into the newly arriving and consistent expansion of settlers at the time and Zionist Jewish population, leading up to the 1936-39 Great Revolt in Palestine, that was fundamentally a revolt by farmers and people who were dispossessed and removed from their land that they've been sharecropping and engaging in farming for the longest period of time. But they were pushed out of the land, and at the time the Zionist labor union, the Histrodot, actually had a mandate of prohibition of employment of Palestinian labor in their farms and in their manufacturing, whatever economic project that was put in place. So if you want to look at the Nakba in 48, again from 1917 to 1939, the Palestinian society was literally being undone at the seam with the British violence, Zionist violence, as well as all types of machinations that makes it possible to incubate Zionism as a settler colonial project during that period. In 1948, the 1948 Nakba results in the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians, destruction of 532 villages, even though that some researchers put it at a much higher number and some at a lower number. The destruction of 12 urban centers, the undertaking of the Haganah and the Stern gang of structured violence and massacres to induce the Palestinians to flight and to induce the Palestinians to fear what was awaiting them. And one of the most famous, again, is the Deir Yassin massacre, but that's not the only one. Even Benny Morris, the Israeli Zionist historian, recognizes and documented massacres, but he went on to justify the massacres and ethnic cleansing by saying it was a justifiable ethnic cleansing, and by saying that you cannot make an omelet without cracking eggs. And here the eggs being the Palestinian society that had to be cracked in order to bring forth the creation of a Zionist Jewish state in Palestine. So Palestinian society's dispossession occurred in 1948, and as a result, we want to jump in history to think of the Gaza population, somewhat of 70 and as high as 80% of the Gaza population are those who were expelled in 1948 from their homes, from their lands, from their villages, from their towns, from their vineyards, to live in a set of refugee camps in small towns in various parts of Gaza. That at the time in 48, Gaza was a small town with literally about 30 to 40,000 population. So much of Gaza's population today, the highest density, population density in the world. So when we speak about acts of genocide, we have to actually say that the Palestinians have been in a slow, methodical genocide, beginning in 1917 with the British, to be precise, continuing in the 1936-39 dismantling and destruction of Palestinian society, including 5,000 being killed at that time, and also the expulsion of Palestinian leadership across the world and sent to exile. Then 1948, we have another genocide that takes place, ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian population, with, again, intention, deliberateness, and planning that takes place. And I think the work of Ilan Pappé on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine is very important, especially pointing to the Dalit plan that was specifically to try to target the areas with Palestinians for ethnic cleansing in a systematic way. And there are additional works that has taken place. I think the work of Nur Masalha is very critical. The work of Walid al-Khalidi, Rashid al-Khalidi is very critical. So there is no longer any type of scholarly dispute about the ethnic cleansing and the acts of genocide being committed in 1948. Unless you are a Zionist who lives and exists in a different, what you call, universe, where denial has been the foundational element, where denying again, denying the existence of Palestinians, denying the existence and historical presence of Palestinians on the land, denying the fact that there was a genocide that was committed and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, denying the massacre. So it's a whole series of denial and existing in an alternative universe that continues to be the case of denying the Nakba. Now, the interesting thing, as we are witnessing the acceleration of genocide in Gaza, the acceleration of attempting to push out 2.3 to 2.5 million Palestinians from Gaza, some of these Zionists who were accustomed to denial, which we recommend for them a 12-step program, now they're saying, literally saying, you're going to have a second Nakba, or we're going to commit a Nakba to you, meaning they're affirming that there was a Nakba in 48, even though up to this point there's a denial. You could actually be prosecuted in Israel if you teach about the Nakba. The Arabs or the Palestinians that are citizens of Israel are not allowed to teach about the Nakba and their experiences. But yet today, as Israel unleashes a systematic, deliberate violence on the Palestinians, there are people that actually are taunting and bullying Palestinians by referencing the first Nakba of 48 as a way to say that we're going to do to you today what we have done in 48. Talk about having the audacity to actually celebrate acts of genocide of the past and use it as a pretext to stage the ongoing genocide as we speak today. So in 48, we get the literally the massive dismantling, the massive genocides committed against the Palestinians with the destruction of civil society. I want to move forward to the current period. And again, for anyone that wants to read on the subject, I recommend for you a number of books that I mentioned, but also you could read Palestine is Something Colonial I wrote. I recommend anything from Noor Masalaha, Rashid al-Khalidi, Ibrahim Abu Lughod, Walid al-Khalidi, Edward Said. So there are a number of works that we have to access, including I have a list of almost 58 different books on my recommended list for Palestine. Palestine has been, as a subject, has been completely distorted. A whole host of propaganda that has been placed by the Zionists, that if you're not careful, you would be narrating Zionist narrative and think that you are narrating Palestinian history, both the ancient history as well as the contemporary period. So it's very important for us to be systematic, deliberate, and engaged in the material pertaining to Palestine, its history, and what is facing. So if we want to situate what is taking place today, we have to actually think of both the Oslo Agreement and the so-called Abraham Accords that were put in place again during the later days of Trump. And both Oslo and the Abraham Accords fundamentally attempted to bypass the Palestinians' right to sovereignty, right to freedom, and end of occupation and end of apartheid. In essence, both Oslo allowed for the massive arrival of settlers into the West Bank. If we think about the number of settlers and settlements, when Oslo was signed in 1993, there were approximately 130,000 settlers in the West Bank. Today, as we speak, the number of settlers in the West Bank are approximately 750,000, some put at 730,000, which means that the numbers of settlers during the peace process have increased by sixfolds. And with it, also the building of the apartheid wall that crisscrossed and literally devoured another big sections of Palestinian land. That's why the International Court of Justice deemed it to be an illegal wall because it was built, again, not on the Green Line to separate 48 from 67, and that's again another discussion, but it was built on the Palestinian side. isolating lands belonging to the Palestinians, and followed the footprint of where water resources, aquifers, are present in the West Bank. So the settler activity accelerated and in essence made it possible to devour much of the West Bank. I actually wrote a piece to remind people because they often are speaking about or demonizing Palestinians relative to violence. We need to remind them that even if you think about the Oslo Agreement, the Oslo Agreement was torpedoed, right, by the Israeli right wing when Baruch Goldstein, the settler who is a Kahanist, Meir Kahane, who's an American extreme right wing, and interestingly enough, Ben Gavir and Smotrich are they glorified Baruch Goldstein, who entered into the Al-Ibrahimi Mosque in Al-Khalil, killed 29 Palestinian Muslim worshippers during the month of Ramadan, during the morning prayer, and also killed over 100, injured over 120 at the time. And that launched the response of the Palestinians' protest and attempt to respond to what was taking place. Now, Baruch Goldstein today has a grave that is a site of visitation for Israeli right wing who are part of the Netanyahu government. The second part where people need to understand about what took place in terms of Oslo is that Netanyahu was one of those who agitated, who stoked right-wing tension directed at Prime Minister Rabin of Israel at the time, who ended up also being assassinated by an extremist right-winger in Israel in 1995. During that election period, again, this is very important historical record for us to understand. During that period, Netanyahu was calling Rabin a traitor because Rabin signed the Oslo Agreement. Distorted as Oslo it is, weakened as it is, did not recognize any Palestinian sovereignty. Still, Netanyahu at the time rallied the right wing in Israel. They actually was an election campaign. They dressed up a picture of Rabin being dressed with the Palestinian hitta, which is the kufi, and the same way that Yasser Arafat was dressed, and literally saying that he is a traitor. Yes, the assassin was Amir, I'm forgetting his last name, who shot the bullet. But it was Netanyahu who gave the oxygen for the right wing, and many in Israel at the time actually charged and accused Netanyahu of stoking this type of atmosphere that ended up in the assassination of Rabin. So this is very important historical record because Netanyahu was committed to actually extreme right-wing Zionism. His father is the editor of Vladimir Jabotinsky, the father of revisionist Zionism, the father of the Likud party, and his father is the editor of the files of Jabotinsky. So Netanyahu is hell-bent on not allowing Palestinian state to emerge and a two-state solution. Again, I'm not going to debate two-state solution, one state, but just to understand where we are at in relations to the Oslo Agreement and why it actually was torpedoed by Israel right wing beginning in 1994, just a year after the signing of the Oslo Agreement, followed by the assassination of Rabin. Right. Moving forward in terms of the Abraham Accords, and I'm not going to go into what happened between, the Abraham Accord was actually to try to transfer the issue to bilateral agreements between Israel and the Arab states, and then for the Palestinians offering a golden cage. We're just going to improve economically. We'll give them few permits to come and work, similar to what you have possibly in here on the border. We'll bring just more illegal, quote, or undocumented people to work, but without actually ending the structure of occupation, the structure of apartheid, the structure of colonization. So it is to bypass Palestinians altogether. And under the Abraham Accord, I would say there was some success relative to Israel. Again, just as to analyze what took place, that Israel was able to sign a very robust agreement with the United Arab Emirates, which was used as a bridge to try to also reach other countries, including Bahrain, Mauritania, Morocco. There was also Sudan, an overture to Oman. And we already had agreements that were signed with Egypt and Jordan much earlier. And all the machinery was moving toward normalization and opening relations with Saudi Arabia as we speak. During this period, again with the Abraham Accord, the Israeli right wing, led by a right wing government, unleashed massive violence on the Palestinians. Very important, because every time that you have somebody that wants to speak about Palestine, they put the microphone in your face to try to actually engage in a series of condemnation, as history begins on the day that they remembered something happened. There are some people said violence returned to the Holy Land. All right. Now the question is that, was violence on vacation before that? Was in Greece taken suntan and all of a sudden returned? Violence has been the conditions of the Palestinians on a daily basis. Almost every day there is a Palestinian being killed or shot. Every day there is an attack that takes place by the settlers in the West Bank. Even if we leave Gaza aside, which has been almost a prison, with prison guards practicing target shooting on prisoners almost on a daily basis, without any let off of that, including 7 major campaigns with bombings, aircraft, and destructions that have been visited on Gaza almost day in and day out. But take that aside for a moment and ask the question about the West Bank. Even before the October 7th, there were 430,000 Palestinians that have been killed in the West Bank. There's been pogroms that have been in attacking some of the Palestinian towns, in Hawara and others. There is close to 6,000 Palestinian prisoners, including again, individuals, which is a unique classification, administrative detention. Ask any of those what you call Johnny-come-lately legal scholars that are hell-bent and they just sweat whenever you talk about Palestine. Tell them, define to me, if you are a legal scholar, what is administrative detention? What legal book does administrative detention fit? What crime that you actually can have in order for you to have administrative detention of Palestinians that could be extended on end? Again, I say this because many of these legal scholars, again, that are struck by whatever type of sophistication that they think they have, they defend Israel, quote, right to defend itself, without actually at any given moment stop to think, well, there's administrative detention. There's almost 1,200 young kids that are held, or actually a poet that gave a poem and they put her under administrative detention. There are teachers that are dragged out and put under administrative detention, that they cannot actually leave their house, right? So all these questions relative to the West Bank, because I know some people, you talk about Gaza, they go into all kinds of what you call stressful position, both mentally, psychologically, and so on with the Palestinians. But let them answer the West Bank. Why is Israel in the West Bank to begin with? That's a question. Why Israel in the West Bank? What is the status of the West Bank in Israel's government at this point? Does the United States recognize that that the West Bank is an occupied territory? If it's an occupied territory, then why is the United States allowing the American settlers to go and settle in the West Bank? Why is it allowing actually charities in the United States to fundraise for the settlements in the West Bank? Why is it allowing settlers' products, olive oil and so on, to be entered? Or as we often many of us see, Palestinian dates from the West Bank, right, being brought in by settlers to sell into the United States. So again, this gives us to actually pose those questions to those that are asking and discussing almost in a vacuum the conditions that have resulted in bypassing the Palestinians with the attempt with the Abraham Accords, by engaging in what's called economic peace, meaning improving the economic conditions of the Palestinians while maintaining them under an apartheid settler colonial project or settler colonial structure inside the West Bank as well as the Gaza Strip. So when we speak about genocide, genocide is very specific, especially if we talk about Article 2 and Article 3 specifically. And I will try to conclude with this, right? Killing members of the group. So again, the Palestinians right now, as we see in Gaza and in the West Bank, are being targeted systematically, with the government actually unleashing massive violence, causing serious bodily or mental harm on members of the group. Again, for our research, for those who do work on mental health, the Gaza Strip population, almost all of them are suffering from not post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's like literally, it's not post, it's traumatic stress syndrome, because many of them have actually experienced 6 or 7 different campaigns against them on unrestrained violence, and then similarly to the West Bank. And this is actually taking place without any Israeli soldier or military person or government being attacked, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring physical destruction or whole or parts. So when you actually cut water, when you cut food, when you cut electricity, when you prevent medicine, when you attack hospitals, time and time again. Now, this is actually very, very important. Why is Israel attacking hospitals? Not only one hospital. Again, they were looking for a Shifa hospital. There's a tunnel. It ended up that the tunnels that are that in the basement was actually developed by the Israelis. This is Ehud Barak, the former prime minister, actually said this was actually done by us when we were the occupying and ruling power in Gaza. So what is it other than actually bringing about the destruction of the population in terms of Gaza, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, forcefully transferring children of the group to another group. And I would say in here we could expand about trying to forcefully transfer the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip and trying to bring plans in that way. Article 3 speaks about all the punishable acts, including genocide itself, conspiracy to commit a genocide, and direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to genocide, and complicity to genocide. For us to think that the United States government and Western European powers, and I would say also include some Arab and Muslim governments who are not acting, are complicit in acts of genocide, and the US media and the Western media is culpable and complicit in bringing about and looking and almost inciting toward genocide by putting stories without being verified. Today, Haaretz actually completely withdrew all of the initial claims that the Israeli government used, especially one of the most atrocious claims relative to the 40 babies being decapitated, with President Biden using the pulpit of the White House to speak and incite against the Palestinians, which rationalized almost all the genocidal attacks that are unfolding in Palestine. And he repeated again when he was here in San Francisco, speaking in the AIPAC conference, repeated that claim again. So on opposite this, we have close to 8,000 Palestinian children and babies completely wiped out, and yet everybody is silent. And the media itself had to there was a whole piece, an article about the suffering of animals on the other side, on the Israeli side of border, yet about 8,000 children being killed. Now we're close to 20,000 between children and women. 70% of all this killed are children and women, yet they're far more focused on the animal suffering, rightly so on the other side. But how many animals? How many animals were wiped out in Gaza? How many donkeys? How many cats? How many dogs? If you're not interested in speaking about Palestinian suffering, maybe the media, maybe those who are of interest can begin to think about maybe the animals, since Palestinians are not really given the empathy to be recognized as a human, and that genocide can be committed against them, but yet the media is actually focusing on the other side and taking the time to actually say that the animals are suffering because of what have transpired. So it is time for us to actually continue to speak of genocide, not to stop organizing, continue to mobilize on campus, and not allow anyone to erase Palestine again. We are demanding freedom, and we're not going back until freedom is attained. We are a people that are calling for freedom, and freedom is the rightful call of the Palestinians. And if you don't understand it, we need to actually time and time again continue to emphasize that we're living under the last settler colonial project, committed, funded, supported, defended by the Western world, and we are demanding and continue to organize for freedom. So thank you for listening, and hopefully I did not go over time.